There are only two classes at this point in society. There is the Shudras, which is the common folk, the people who, the working class, and then there is the triangle, which is the people with power. They have the money, they have the power, but now in 2025, they also have a decision making capacity of what you believe, what your thoughts are, what your morality is, to the power of social media, and therefore now they have three-fourths of society's power, and they're using that three-fourth power in order to control the masses. Hello thinkers, welcome to the Apex Mind. In today's discussion, we are going to discuss the Varna system and why it should be applied to modern society. So for reference, I was thinking about the state of modern culture, the state of modern society, and what capitalism has done essentially to the human psyche, to the human mind. Think about it this way. Capitalism, and at its core, believes that human beings are selfish, human beings are greedy, and we are profit incentivized, right? Capitalism is what gave rise to the notion that there was a barter system before money was introduced. Yes, barter system did exist, but it was more so a system based on trust. I will give you a horse if you need it because you are someone who've helped me a lot during famine, helped me feed my family. That is what really was going on, and not the barter system of 4 bags of rice for a horse. That wasn't the case. Society was trusting in nature. We believed in inherent human goodness. Capitalism, on the other hand, it gave rise to the notion that human beings are inherently selfish and profit driven, right? I will not give you this earphones if you need it. I will only give you this if you give me something of equal value. There is no trust in that relationship, and therefore what that leads to is a society which is run by merchants, or run by, as Vedic Hindus would call, Vaishyas. There is a reason why in the Varna system, Brahmins, or more specifically knowledge seekers or knowledge gainers or knowledge hoarders, they were the ones who were at the top of the hierarchy. It was a society or a system in which knowledge preceded everything else. Now, the issue with modern society, I feel, is the fact that that knowledge or that dictation of what must be done and what mustn't be done is now given by people who hold money. It sort of breaks the system, and that is the reason you suffer. That is the reason everything in life is just about gaining money, earning money, and you are suffering on a day-to-day basis. So let me start by firstly telling you what the Varna system is. And before I do that, let's see what this person here thinks. I mean, ChatGPT here thinks.
Alright, here's what I think. The Varna system, as originally conceived in the Vedas, was meant to be a functional classification, not a rigid caste hierarchy. At its core, it sorted people based on guna and karma, your natural tendencies and your work, not by birth. The Brahmins were seekers of knowledge and wisdom. The Kshatriyas protected and governed. The Vaishyas handled commerce and trade. And the Shudras served through skilled labor. Now, in theory, this kind of division could create a society where every person functions in their highest strength, aligned with their disposition and values. But in capitalism, that whole alignment collapses. Commerce is no longer one role among many. It becomes the dominant engine of society. The Vaishya class, metaphorically, ends up ruling everyone. And unlike the Brahmins, who were meant to renounce material desires and act as guides for dharma, merchants in capitalism have no dharmic obligation. They're incentivized purely by accumulation. So what you're pointing to isn't a return to the caste system. You're actually advocating for a reset in value systems, a move from profit-based hierarchy to wisdom-based leadership. And the question becomes, can a society be built where decision makers aren't the wealthiest, but the wisest? What do you think the modern equivalent of a Brahmin even looks like today?
I'll tell you that, but before, let me just show the audience what the Varna or the caste system is, specifically the audience which are not well aware of it. So, Hindus, they divided society among 4 classes. There were the Brahmins, there were the Kshatriyas, there were the Vaishyas, and there were the Shudras. Brahmins were people who were teachers, who were priests, who were seekers of knowledge, and who were also dispersers of knowledge. So assume the entirety of knowledge in society was ruled by this class. Similarly, Kshatriyas were kings, they were warriors, they were soldiers, they were police. They were the people who hold all the physical might, all the power of society were held by Kshatriyas. And thirdly, there were Vaishyas. all the wealth of society itself now was owned by Vaishyas. They were the they were the ones who were the merchants. They were the ones who were the business owners. They were the ones who held most money. While on the other hand, Shudras were in the most in number. These were laborers. These were the amalgamation of society as a whole. They held capital resource in terms of human resource, and therefore the four axes of society were equally divided. Right? Knowledge is a very powerful tool in society. It was given to one class of people. Power itself, strength itself is very important. It is also a very strong axiom of society that was given to another group of people, and another group of people were responsible for the wealth aspects of things. And Shudras, therefore, for example, for the rest of the people, the human laborers. For example, if the majority of people who are actually executing the task, they decide that power does not exist, money matters nothing, and knowledge does not even matter, how are you going to stop them? So all these four castes or all these four Varnas, they balanced each other out in terms of who held what power.
That explanation's actually really clean. And what stands out is the idea that these weren't meant to be competitive classes. They were interdependent, almost like organs in a single body. The Brahmin wasn't meant to dominate the Kshatriya, just like the brain doesn't dominate the arm. It just coordinates. But the moment one group tries to play all roles or denies the value of another, imbalance kicks in. And that's what happened in modernity. Capitalism let the Vaishya class eat the rest. They now own media, knowledge, they fund politics, power, and they dominate even cultural labor, the Shudras. So the whole system's become top-heavy on wealth, but hollow everywhere else. So back to my question, if modern society needs Brahmins again, where are they? What would a 21st century Brahmin even look like? Because it's clearly not the guy doing rituals or chanting verses anymore.
I mean, that is inherently a misunderstanding of what a Brahmin really is. Brahmin is someone who holds knowledge. Brahmin is someone who is not allowed to hold any of the other resources. The basic point of a caste system is again this distinction between all of the other functions as such, right? Brahmins are not powerful by themselves. They are simply powerful because we play an emphasis on the fact that knowledge matters. The reason, for example, Brahmins represent the head of Brahma, the creator god. Kshatriyas represents the arms of Brahma. Vaishyas represents the thighs of the Brahma, and Shudras represent the feet of the Brahma himself, God himself. What that means at the end of the day, imagine an isolated head. What can an isolated head do except think? What if you can only think, you cannot execute, you are completely useless. Similarly goes for power or strength. Kshatriyas held all the power because execution is done through the hands, right? But hands without brains or hands without legs or any other body part, they can't do anything. My hand can contract, it can pick things up, but who decides what needs to be picked up? Again, no one is. So all it does is this. Then comes money, very importantly here, because we're discussing capitalism. Vaishyas are the ones who are holding all the wealth, all the money. The point is, without thighs, without the femur, without your legs, you cannot stand. If you cannot stand, you cannot place yourself, you cannot balance yourself. Therefore, money is the stability of a society. Without money, no matter how much knowledge you have, how much so-called power you have, you cannot do anything. Even powerful warrior lords like Genghis Khan, they used to do wars and they used to loot villages so that they can acquire money. Money or resources is the food that you consume, is the fertile lands that you have. It is essentially the basis or the production or the upkeep of the society. And finally, there is a reason Shudras were given the feet, because without feet you cannot move, you cannot go from place to place. At the end of the day, if you do not have your feet, no matter how great of a thigh you have, there is no execution of the thigh, right? Money or resources are therefore, the thigh's power is divided to the feet so that society can stand and so that society can walk. There is no execution without the Shudras themselves, and that is the reason there is this distinction or the difference. But the point is, all of these different sorts of varnas are interdependent, and once you start conflating these two, once one place holds more power as well as money, ultimately what happens? it results in an imbalance. It results in a society which is not balanced among itself. A modern day Brahmin, as you are going to ask me, is someone who's not interested in wealth or who's not allowed to have wealth. Someone who's allowed to have all the knowledge, someone who's allowed to essentially decide the morality itself of society, but who cannot hold any power or who cannot hold any money. A funny example would be an autistic person who is who is intelligent and who is interested in simply going towards their passions and looking at all of the abstract systems. That is someone who's not going to worry about money, right? That is a true modern day Brahmin. A Brahmin is not even supposed to look at money. It's not even supposed to look at power. All they should care about is knowledge, is higher learning, and is deciding what is right and what isn't. Other things are divided amongst other people. The issue with modern society specifically that I have and I believe is a very major issue is that this triangle or this hierarchy of power is not a hierarchy anymore, right? It is the fact that there are only two classes anymore: the upper triangle, which is the tech billionaires, CEO, politicians, or powerful people, and the bottom rung, which is all of us. There are only two classes at this point in society. There is the Shudras, which is the common folk, the people who the working class, and then there is the triangle, which is the people with power. They have the money, they have the power, but now in 2025 they also have a decision making capacity of what you believe, what your thoughts are, what your morality is, through the power of social media, and therefore now they have 3/4 of society's power, and they're using that 3/4 power in order to control the masses. That is the issue with modern society.
Exactly. The Varna system, at least in its idealized functional form, wasn't meant to oppress. It was a power distribution blueprint. It separated domains so no single class could hoard everything. But capitalism did the exact opposite. It collapsed the whole diagram. Now the merchant has become the philosopher king. He owns the information, media, education, the army, lobbying, private security, and even the priesthood, influencers, spiritual branding, ideological control. And the people? Just feet. No say in where they walk. Just pushed forward on borrowed will. So the question becomes, if you truly are a modern Brahmin, if you think not for profit or clout, but to guide society back towards structural balance, then what is your dharma in a world where every Varna is collapsing into one? That's where your channel matters. Because if knowledge dies quietly, everything else will follow.
Exactly. And the funny, ironical twist in all of this is that it was probably rishis or people from the Brahmin Varna themselves who decided that they should not hold any power. They knew the implications of what happens when one person holds resources, power, and the ability to influence people. That is the issue. They were able to put a stop to themselves. But people who are driven by money, people who are driven by greed, whose inherent constitution is to get greed, power, money, whatever, they are people who are never going to make that decisions for themselves. And therefore, today, in this day and age, it is our responsibility to make sure that this triangle of people with all the unlimited power and us go back to being a hierarchy where everyone does their own job, or not even a hierarchy, let's just assume 4 individual shapes where everyone does their own job, because these people are not going to let it go. Therefore we are responsible for ourselves. We have to use the 4th power that we all of us do possess. It is the power of collectiveness, the power of human resource. That is the main point. Bring back the Varna system. Not even as a hierarchy maybe this time, just as the real understanding of a Varna system is the division of power amongst 4 or maybe more classes of people, all of whom make sure that each of themselves are not fighting amongst each other, are never getting too powerful. It's a nuclear deterrent of sorts. So that was my video, that was my understanding of the Varna system, and that was my prescription. I do not mean to reintroduce a hierarchy where one caste or one sort of people are abused. That is what happens when power starts concentrating. The point is to make sure power doesn't concentrate, yet it remains balanced. If everyone held equal amounts of all the power, society will not function. There needs to be a distinction, and this is how you separate it. That is the ancient Vedic era's example of how society can be divided. Maybe we don't even need to follow their model exactly. but we need to understand the ontological implications, at least the societal implications of what they were trying to do, and replicate it in the modern world. Do not let these people influence you. Do not even let me influence you. Listen to me, maybe find something interesting, and more specifically, if you disagree with something, put it down in the comments. I like when people disagree with me specifically, because it's fun, because I get to learn more, right? I get to see more perspectives, and that is what I love more than anything else. And that is what you should also love more than anything else in my worldview. But you can even disagree with that. Anyway, this has been the Apex Mind. This was another controversial discussion, and I hope that you enjoyed it, or at least it made you think. See ya, and remember one last thing that I always tell on the channel: patterns, they're everywhere.